If you're brand new to the Fusion page of DaVinci Resolve, here is an interface tour of all the things you need to know. So first of all, if you have a clip in your timeline, all you have to do is switch over to the Fusion page, and that will open up the clip from the timeline in Fusion. Now, first thing let's talk about are the viewers. So we have this viewer here on the right, and by default, this is going to be what the person who watches your project is going to see. This is what gets sent to the timeline. The reason for that is because the node that we're viewing in this viewer is this media out node. I can tell in a couple ways. One is there's these two little dots down here, and the right one is white, which means that it's in the right-hand viewer. The other way I can tell is it says media out 1 right here. Okay, so whatever node is loaded in the viewer, it's going to say the name right there at the top. But by default, when you open up a new Fusion composition, this viewer is going to be what is rendered to the timeline because media out is loaded into that viewer. This is one of two viewers. We would call this the right viewer. And then we have the left viewer over here. And this works exactly the same way. It's just a separate viewer. So we could look at our media in here on the left viewer just by clicking and dragging this node into the viewer, or you can select the node and hit 1 on the keyboard to kind of toggle it off and on in that viewer. And so now we have kind of a before and after situation going on with our viewers because media in goes into this viewer and media out goes into this viewer. Now, again, we can load any node into any viewer. And so if I were to take one of these icons here and drag it into the node graph, like this background node, I can take this background node and drag this up to the viewer like this, and that's going to be a preview of this background node. So by default, this is creating a black background. I could push this up and make a green background, and that's going to show us what's going on in just this node. You'll notice that nothing is happening over here because this green background isn't attached to this media out. If we had it attached, if I were to take the little gray square and drop this on the yellow input of this media out, then we would see green on the right as well, because we're taking this background and we're connecting it to the media out, which is what we're going to render, which again, by default is on the right. But I can also grab media in 1 and just as easily put that on the right, or the background on the right, or the media out on the left, and reconnect things and do all that. But just to keep things simple, I pretty much always just put my media out on the right, and then I use this left viewer to view random nodes and whatever I want to kind of preview. Now, these viewers have a few different options, which we'll get into in a little bit. For now, this is where you view any node. Below these viewers, we have our timeline. So I can grab this playhead, which is just a little red line, and I can pull it back and forth to kind of scrub through my clip. There's these little yellow markers on each side, and this is the work area. And so what I can do is I can actually set this work area to be smaller by adjusting these numbers here. And what that's going to do is just loop this section. Confusingly, this doesn't make an in and an out on our timeline. We'll still see the entire clip on the timeline. It doesn't do any kind of editing. But in the Fusion page, I'm just going to preview this little part of my clip. So you can just think of this as like the preview region. This is the part that I loop and I watch over and over again, which is great if there's just like one little part of your clip that you want to see. I'm just interested in the end, then I can just work on the end like that. I can reset this by right-clicking here on the timeline and just saying auto render range. That's going to bring that back to 0 and the end. And I can play this back, and I have little transport controls here below everything. The other thing that's interesting is, let's say I want to zoom in and just really focus on one part. So, I mean, not only can I set my work area to say 91 here, I can grab this little gray bar, I can grab the edge of it, and I can move this over, and I can just zoom into whatever part I want on the timeline. That's just going to zoom in so that I can concentrate on this and I'm not worrying about the entire ruler from beginning to end. I'm just worrying about the little part that I want to loop. Again, this doesn't actually change the clip in the timeline. It doesn't make the clip shorter or longer or anything. It's just kind of your preview and your playback. Over here to the right, this is our current frame. So you can just see this as a number. Whatever frame you're on, it's going to be right there. And below all of this, we have these icons here, and this is what we call our toolbar. So the toolbar is interesting because it's not like the toolbar in the edit page where you can switch to different tools and it changes your cursor. How it works in the Fusion page is it's literally a bar of tools. Each node that we're using here in the node graph is actually called a tool. And so I can take any of these icons and just drag them down off of the toolbar to make different tools, different nodes, right? And so this is just a quick way to be able to get to pretty commonly used nodes like backgrounds and fast noise and text and so on. Now you can also make your own customized version of this. If you right click in the empty space and go to customize, create toolbar. And so we'll call this KC. And now by default, it's just like a copy of it, but you could right click on any of these and you could remove any of them. So let's say this P directional force, we could get rid of that, or we could get rid of the group. Let's just remove the group, sure. And anything that you just don't find yourself using, you could go in and just remove each of these. So for instance, I don't ever use the spotlight, so I could remove the spotlight. And then if I want to add other tools, I can go to my effects panel, which I can open by clicking right up here. And now we have all of the tools here. So for instance, let's say I like directional light. I can take directional light and put this here. And now I have the directional light that's easy to grab. And so if you're working in Fusion a lot and you find yourself using this toolbar, you can customize it, which is really neat. At any point, you can right click and go down to default, and that's going to load your default toolbar again. I pretty much always keep this on default because I do tutorials all the time and I don't want it to be confusing. But if I weren't, I would probably make a custom toolbar. I recommend you do that too. Now, below our toolbar is where the magic happens. This is the node graph. And this is where 90% of your work in Fusion actually happens. Now, a lot of this, interface is actually learning just how nodes work. But there are a few things that I want to point out is one, if you right click on the empty space here, there are quite a few options for how your nodes look. One of the things that I always go to is I go to Arrange Tools, and I make my Arrange Tools look like this. I uncheck To Grid, check To Connected, and uncheck Auto Arrange. I like this because it doesn't have to snap to the grid, which can sometimes be annoying, but the nodes will snap to each other. And so we have nice straight lines most of the time. I like to take off Auto Arrange because, see, when I have Auto Arrange on, and you were to, let's say, make a node like that, that's going to kind of move things around, which if you have something set up exactly right, like you really like it like this, and you go, okay, now I want a blur node, it's going to move things around like that. And it's really annoying because then you have to move stuff back up like this to kind of fix your layout. But if I don't have Auto Arrange on, Arrange Tools, uncheck Auto Arrange, and I grab this and I add a blur, it's going to add a blur, and it's going to be kind of annoying because it's going to be sort of over things sometimes, but it doesn't move everything around and ruin everything. It just kind of like sets this in a weird place, and then you can fix it. I mean, you're going to have to fix it anyway, but I'd rather fix one node than like 10 of them that it just shot everywhere into Narnia. And there are a bunch of other options here in this right-click menu. I would go through and play with them and see which you like. There's probably too much to cover in this video. You can right click and go to Force Source Tile Pictures. And what that's going to do is kind of make these source nodes, the image nodes, into kind of big icons. And so they're a little bit easier to recognize. I don't particularly like that. I like to have everything kind of the same. So I won't force Source Tile Pictures. You can also do it for mask or active tile. You can do it for all tiles. And you can have like these big icons. I think it's a waste of space, so I'm not going to do that. I like to have them nice and compact. The other thing that can be sometimes helpful is the navigator, which you can hit V on the keyboard. And it's kind of like this little zoom box thing. And so when you zoom in or out, and especially if you have nodes kind of spread all the way around the world, you might be zoomed in here. You can grab this navigator and kind of move around to the other nodes, which is sometimes really nice. Most of the time, I find myself having this navigator over things and getting really annoyed. And so I usually just turn it off. Again, you can just hit V on the keyboard to turn that off. When it comes to working with nodes, I like to line them up like this. Generally, when I have a merge, I'll have the background come in from the left, the foreground come in from the top, and the mask come in from the bottom. Now, you can make these, you can put these wherever you want. It doesn't really matter what direction they're flowing. It's just a organizational thing, all right? It's just a standard that I have to where I can recognize things a little bit quicker if, you have a constant standard, right? So we generally flow from left to right. Foregrounds come in from the top. Mask for a merge comes in from the bottom. And then everything else is a little bit more loose, right? So if I have a mask on this background, I might have it come in on the side, might have it come in from the top, depending on how much real estate I have here in the nodes. But that's kind of some basics on how I set up the interface for the nodes. Again, really, Fusion is all about the nodes. I have a lot of videos about how to use nodes and how those work, so I definitely recommend checking those out. But continuing on with the interface stuff, if you select a node, what it's going to do is populate the inspector over here with its properties, okay? So you can open and close the inspector with this button up here, and the inspector works just like it does in the edit page and the Fairlight page and the cut page, in that whatever you have selected, its properties show up right here, okay? That same thing happens for the nodes. So you can select any node and adjust its controls. Let's actually have this go through here. Let's say we want to blur this. Generally, there's a mix of a couple different controls. We have sliders like this, which will go from one hard stop to another. Anytime you have that and you want to go beyond that, you can pretty much always type in a bigger number, and then that will kind of reset this range. And it'll take that range from 0 to 200 now. There's buttons, which can be exclusive, so you could pick none or frame or domain here. There's drop downs that let you pick one or the other. Let's run this through a transform. There are screw controls like this, which you can just infinitely twirl like that. There are point controls, and anytime that you have a number, you can click and drag left and right to kind of slide it back and forth. You can double click on the name of any control to reset it. Over here to the right of the controls, there are these little diamonds. You can click on any diamond, and when it turns red, that's going to set a keyframe. And so we can go from here to here, and this is going to animate this center using those keyframe controls. Now, whatever node that you have selected, that's what's going to pop up here in the inspector. And usually that's pretty much what I do. But you can also have multiple controls for multiple nodes here in the inspector. I could select 2 nodes, and that's going to give me at least kind of a twirl down for each node. I can also select a node and then pin it like this. And that's going to keep that open. And I can click on another node and I can have the controls open for both nodes. And so if I need to see them both at the same time, or if I'm linking something with an expression, it's a little bit easier to access 2 different nodes. There are also versions for each node. And so I can do something like, maybe I'll zoom in here on our actress like this. Then I can go up to this little button and click that. This is version 1, switch to version 2, and that's going to make a duplicate of this. And maybe I'll bring in the size, shape like that. And then I can switch in between these versions really quickly and kind of use these as little presets. So if I like one, but I want to try something else out, I can switch to 2 really easily and just switch in between. That's a nice thing to be able to do. And every node, depending on the node, will have certain controls, but then it's also going to have a settings tab, which is generally pretty standardized. It'll have a blend slider, as well as a few more options here that are common to most nodes. We'll reset our transform as well, and we'll just do kind of a zoom here. Like this. So we're just animating that zoom as we go forward in that transform. And now that we have something keyframed, we can adjust the keyframes in one of 2 panels. We have the Spline panel and the Keyframes panel. The Keyframes panel is more about kind of the timing of things. And so if I were to select this transform, open up the Keyframes panel, and then click this button right here, which is the Zoom to Fit button, I can twirl down this transform, and here I have these 2 little tick marks. These are the keyframes. And so if I want this whole thing to happen a little bit faster, I can push those keyframes together. And so now we have this zoom happening right there as this is moving forward. Let's move this even a little bit quicker. So it zooms in like that, and then it walks in. And I can select the keyframes just by dragging a box like this. And when they're yellow, I can push them back and forth. And so we can just change the timing, kind of when things happen here in the keyframes panel. You can also see kind of how this relates to the timing of the whole clip. And so if I have something like, I don't know, some text or something that's coming in, and that is being animated, so we can have this come up like this, then we'll also have the keyframes for that text. And so I can make the text come up before the movement or during it. And I can kind of change the timing here to match these up. I can have one after another. So this is kind of the easiest way to move your keyframes back and forth in time. Now, if I want to change kind of how the keyframes work, that really happens more in the Spline panel. So let's undo the keyframes and move over to the Spline panel. And I'm just going to select the transform here. And by default, this probably looks more like this, where we have a bunch of things checked here. What I like to do is go to these three dots and select show only selected tool like this, because then I don't have just a whole list of things. You can check what you want to change here and then click on the zoom to fit button like that. And now we have a graph of that movement. I can select any of these keyframes and I can change the handles just by dragging the handles like this, and this will ease the keyframes. So that means that as this goes up in time, it kind of slows down before it hits this last keyframe. So especially for this zoom, it's really nice for it to really kind of slow down before it gets to stopping. We can just take this out like this. That's a nice way to have kind of a snap zoom. But this is how you ease your keyframes, is in this panel. You can select a keyframe and hit F on the keyboard to flatten it. I can hold Alt and click and drag this handle out and it won't move up or down. It's just going to get longer or shorter. So I can really push this out extreme, whoosh, where it just whoosh, pops in there like that. But this is where you actually kind of change the interpolation of the keyframes and making sure they start and slow down and smooth out and that kind of thing. It's also worth noting that if you're going to move things around, so let's just grab this transform. If we're going to move this around like with a position, let's say, so let's start with the center right here. And then as we zoom in, maybe we move this up like this, and then we move it back like this. There's a couple things that need to happen here is one, the speed of the animation, which happens here in this displacement like this. And so I can flatten these keyframes and hit S for smooth, and that's going to smooth out this curve, right? But we're still going to have kind of this weird bounce in our animation, and that's because of this path right here. And so I can select this and kind of do the same thing. I can say Shift S for smooth, and I can really kind of change this path as well so that we have a smooth movement that isn't jerky. So when you're changing stuff, especially things that are a position, you need to both worry about this curve as well as the actual path. That took me way too long to figure out in Fusion, and now you know it. Okay, so a couple more panels we should touch on here. In the upper left, we have our media pool. This works just like the media pool in the edit page. What's cool is I can grab a piece of media and I can just drag it down here into my nodes, and that makes a media in, which means that I can load a piece of media from the media pool. So let's just go over to our next clip here. We'll switch back to Fusion. And so if I want to add a sky, I can grab these clouds, merge this over like this, and then put a mask on this merge. We'll just do a nice soft mask here. And then we can replace this sky, have it look really cool. The other thing, which we kind of touched on earlier, is the effects panel. And this has all of the tools inside of Fusion all laid out in one menu. You can twirl down where it says tools here, and you can kind of look at this in categories. We also have templates, both for the edit page as well as Fusion. And so you can actually drag a lot of these templates down here. So for instance, like a background, we can grab this bullseye background and take a look at it. And these are just kind of preset groups of nodes that have all kinds of cool stuff you can do. That's pretty cool. All kinds of presets, and you can double click and open this up and play with them and see how they're built, which is pretty cool. Some of them even have comments on exactly how they work, which is really nice. But pretty much anything that you want to get to as far as the tools in Fusion are right here in the effects panel. You can also really quickly search for any effect by hitting Shift and then hitting spacebar. So hold Shift and hit spacebar, and then you can search for it. So if you want to search for a blur, these will bring up all of the different blurs. You just click on it and hit add, and that will add the tool to the node graph. Next to the media pool and the effects, we have our clips. And this is actually really neat. This will let you navigate in between your shots in your timeline. And so you can quickly go to other shots that need visual effects. You can even, if you have something applied to your image, so I just have this brightness and contrast, I can be on this other clip and then middle button mouse click on this first clip and say overwrite Fusion composition and apply that same Fusion comp to this clip, which is really great if you're going to do similar things and you just need to tweak it. The clips panel is really great. And so that's most of the panels here in Fusion. I do want to take a second and talk about some of the viewer options because these are really, really important. Here, I'll just make one viewer here. In the upper left, we have our zoom, which is pretty self-explanatory. Next to that, we have our buffers. Now, this is really cool. So let's say you wanted to see the difference between one way of doing something and another way of doing something. So for instance, we have our brightness and contrast here, but let's say we want to use, a curve or something. We'll link this into the curves. And I'll add a little bit of contrast here for our curve. And maybe we'll run this through a color corrector and take some saturation down. So we have a similar look here for this color corrector as well as the brightness and contrast. What we can do is we can load this one into the A buffer, which by default is the A buffer. And we can use this color corrector. We can switch this to the B buffer like this, and then hit 2 on the keyboard to load this in. And then what we could do is both either switch between A and B like this, or we can go to the buffer split wipe. And this is cool. So this will give us an A and B comparison, which we can kind of wipe back and forth, and we can compare any node to any other node, which is a great way to do it. And we can really see the difference that each technique makes. Of course, it's really easy to accidentally switch to a different buffer or whatever and get yourself in trouble. So just make sure if you're not playing with that you're just on the A buffer and you have everything loaded into the viewer that you want to look at. Next to that, we have our little overlays, and there's all kinds of cool stuff. So by default, there's a histogram. I can just click on this little button here, and this will load a color scope, which is pretty great. We can switch out our different scopes. So vector scope, waveform, which can be really helpful if you're doing certain tasks. We even have a magnifier, which is kind of neat. So we can kind of zoom in on different parts of the screen, which is kind of fun. Color inspector, which is great for picking specific colors based on their RGB value. Yeah, and you can turn that off and on just by clicking right there. And there's a few other things that you probably don't need to know about right now, but this one is really great. This little Venn diagram looking thing. These are your channels. So by default, we're looking at the color channel, but we can switch to other channels like just looking at the red channel, the green channel, or the blue channel, or the alpha. And so that's really great, especially if you're trying to select something by a certain color, or if you want to use a specific channel for a specific reason. So for instance, sometimes you can select things by brightness based on a different channel. So for instance, this red channel, we have a darker sky and a brighter foreground, which might be a little bit easier to make a selection from or do tracking from. We can look at the alpha channel of something. So for instance, if I were to key this with like a delta keyer, I can select just the blue, and then I can hit A, or I can go up here and select alpha, and we can look at the actual transparency based on that blue selection. And then I could go in here and refine my selection to get a nice black and white matte. But that's something that I do all the time, is switch to the alpha channel and back. Another thing that can be really helpful is you can load a LUT on the viewer. And so by default, it's just the Fusion View LUT, which oftentimes won't do anything, but if you have color management, will kind of work with your color management. But you can do things like load a color space transform or a certain LUT if you want to just kind of preview on the viewer. So for instance, if we wanted to load a color space transform, we can select that and then go up to edit, and then we can do our color space transforms here, which depending on how you're doing your color management might be really helpful. This button opens up 1 or 2 viewers, and then we have some options here with these 3 dots. One that I'll point out is the gain gamma. If you select gain and gamma, this will adjust the gain and the gamma of just your preview. So it doesn't actually change the image. It just kind of lets you look at the image brighter or darker just to see if there are any problems, or if you need to look at some enhanced noise or something like that. This can be a good way to kind of preview things. You can reset them by clicking the little dots in the middle. And of course, if you turn off gain and gamma like that, it'll disable it. But that's pretty much the entire interface of Fusion. Let's go ahead and explore the interface while we do something here. So I have this shot of this lady just chilling, and I was thinking that we should put a little bit of fog here in the foreground. I can scrub back and forth to really look at this with the timeline. I have my media out loaded in my second viewer. I can open up the 2 viewers by clicking this button right here. And I think what we'll do is hit Shift Spacebar and type planar tracker. This is a tracker that will let me capture the movement of this shot. And so I'll just drag that to the left viewer here. And I'm just going to select kind of where this light ray is, like this. And then with the tracker selected, I can go over to the inspector, and this is where I can adjust any of the properties. For motion type, instead of perspective, I'll say translation, rotation, and scale. I'm going to set my reference time and track it forward and track it backward, just like that. And now I can hit create planar transform. that will make a special tool here, planar transform. And this is a transform node with keyframe data on it. And what that's going to do is take the motion from this clip and it's going to apply it to a transform so that anything that we run through this transform is going to have the same motion. So if I were to grab some text like this and run it through this planar transform and then merge this planar transform over, we can see that the text sticks to the image, especially right here. That's where it's really supposed to stick. So yeah, that kind of stays in place. Now, instead of this text, we're going to use a node called fast noise. So I'm just dragging the fast noise down here and putting it through the planar transform. And I'm going to go to image, that's this third icon, uncheck auto resolution and push up the width and the height to be a lot bigger so that we don't have those edges. Go to the noise, push up the detail and the scale like that. And so now we have this kind of fog. And I'm going to take a B-spline mask and connect that to the blue input like this. And I'm just going to kind of make a little blobby shape here and push up the soft edge like this. So we have a little bit of this kind of fog. And now that should track just fine with the clip. Ooh, that looks good. Let's animate this a little bit just by taking this fast noise, and I'm going to push up the seed rate a little bit. That's going to change this fast noise over time. So it's going to animate this. I'll hit A to just look at the alpha. It's going to kind of just slightly animate this over time. Let's push this up more so we can really see it. See how it's kind of wiggling? Let's not do it quite that much though. We want just a little bit. Yeah, something like that. I think that'll work just fine. So now it looks like we have this kind of fog being illuminated by that light. Now we have this really cool effect here where we're just adding some kind of digital smoke. Here's before and here's after. So we're really doing a lot of work on this and it looks good. That's so awesome. So yeah, that's how we can use the interface of Fusion to make something really cool. If you want to download this footage and try this yourself, there's a link down in the description below. That'll take you to our media vault where you can download this and a whole bunch of other footage and media to practice working in Resolve, working in Fusion, doing color grades, doing composites, all of those good things. In fact, I'll even put a link right there too. How about that? I hope this has been helpful for you. If it has, let me know in the comments, okay? I'll see you later. See you another time. I'll see you around another time.